Okay, now we got Gospel Part 2. There's not much more to say about the word, except that I wasn't aware of that other use of spell. That's new to me. But it doesn't surprise me. There's a lot of archaic uses of different words. And this word here, God or Gos, the way it turned out there is there's a lot of different theories out there of what it means. I am a believer that it comes from the word Odin, and that was the divinity associated with the wind. And so when Wolfele was translating the Bible, he wanted to convey the same sort of ideas that were being conveyed in Greek, and the idea and in the theology, the Hebrew theology, which was basically the God is the thing behind everything. It's hidden, it's one, it's all powerful, and it's moving everything into existence. And those are some of the traits that the divinity Odin was describing. The air, it being air, associated with air is because air was invisible, and in ancient Egypt, the divinity Amun was also associated with air, and was and then had this very deeper meaning of faith, and the faith science sort of developed around it, and the Amun Ra was sort of this duality that was very powerful, of light and the unknown. And likewise in the Germanic world, I've heard stories of scholars that say that Odin was associated with the rising of the sun, and the other words that came from the Indo-European people that migrated there. They were very similar words, and so that's why there's another theory. The most accepted theory is that it has to do with the ritual of pouring libations, and I believe that they're all connected. They're all very similar words with the similar connection, and they sorry, I'm seeing something. I was chatting with people and wanted to see if they were saying anything, but no. And so that's why I think all these ideas in Iceland, there were priestesses and people with the name Guda or something like that. And so in this culture, especially the homeland of the Germanic cultures, they lived very in the low areas near the ocean, where you can't really just dig a well, you're just going to get seawater. So they relied on water that came from the sky, and so water was actually very scarce in those societies, and so there's a lot of constant theme in the language of water being associated to the soul. The sea and the soul, those two words are together. The pouring of libations, the pouring of water is basically the life-giving activity. You're pouring water, you're drinking water, you're watering a plant, and so that became sort of, this is what I believe, is it became all tied together with these sort of very similar ideas of this unknown thing that was behind everything, that was in the air, and and also the things that were good, the things that were pleasant, and um, also and water, and in time they started developing beer and things like that, and they probably already had it at that time. And so beer is just a way to preserve water, because many societies in the Roman society, they drank wine and things like that, and that was a way for them to be able to drink water. Cider was popular in the United States for that same reason. But obviously, that these have consequences, because if that's your only source of water, that's you're gonna have health problems, and you're gonna make wrong choices quite often. And but that was survival, and that's the ritual, and beer. They figured out that that beer had to be regulated. Back then it was really witch's brew of things that they could mix with it. It's like the Amazon, where they drink ayahuasca and stuff like that. So the beer became part of all this rituals of drinking this stuff that nowadays scientists and anyone knowledgeable about plants and will say that's harmful to you. And back then they would experience those moments of either near death or hallucinations or whatever, and would feel like that connects them to these hidden things. And that's my perspective. This is not. I'm not a scholar on these topics, so don't quote me as the authority. And so that's God. That was God in the Germanic societies. Wulfla, he went down to Constantinople, and he worked with a couple scribes there, and they were part of a group of people that went east, and then they went west, and they just integrated, and they disappeared, and that group in the west adopted Christianity, and they were very close to the church in Alexandria. So they were practicing a North African Christianity. That was a Germanic society that was practicing African Christianity. And that's kind of a problem with these religions is that I've said in other videos, they divide, and you have Islam, you have Judaism, you have Christianity taking over Egypt, and then going and Judaism was in Egypt too, and then eventually Islam went into Egypt. I believe they're all the same thing. There's some differences in the scriptures. I believe the scriptures are written by scribes, and they have wisdom and knowledge of their cultures and of the perspectives that they have about these holy things, and that they instruct and give people knowledge of those holy things. And that's why they're holy scriptures. And so they but they contain a lot of different things, and if you read them, but people, they're really critical and harsh, and they'll say, no, this is so bad, and this is so doesn't make sense, and the believers, they just believe it, and even if it doesn't make sense, they just repeat it, and they don't think about it, and they tell no one else to think about it or talk about it. I think there's a middle ground, because there's things that people have found. For example, in Hebrew, the word for virgin is also a word for a young maiden or a young woman. And so there are some people that believe that when the story of the life of Jesus was written into Greek by people, it was translated in their head. So they chose the right words that they knew for the equivalents in the language, or based on the stories that they heard, because we're not even sure if these scribes that wrote them were the actual disciples. Evidence is showing that they weren't. even though those particular stories are attributed to those disciples, it could have been, like a chain of stories. And these cultures, that was their livelihood. They were the storytellers. So, this is, it's really a miracle that all these stories have been preserved through time. And based on the things that I've learned and researched, I think that's what the sort of the Gabriel angel sort of represents, is that strength of that time of Allah, of that it preserved through that whole time, and so it gave it the sense of that that this message was strong, that this message was founded on something from the very beginning, from the source of everything. And that was the reason for the angels. The angels were a way, was almost like a science for the way, similar to the Neter of ancient Egypt, to describe, the relationship between things, and they were used symbolically to describe things that were different, but they never worshipped them. And so then that, if you read the Bible, there's things in the Bible that just don't get talked about, because in our society, the main authority was the Catholic Church, and then the Protestants who separated, they began to study the Bible in different languages, and in that process, a lot of information became available, but some information got lost because it just keeps getting translated. And so we have the official version, where they have, official perspectives that you can't argue. And then we have, the more open version that has just almost the assumption that it is the best version because it's open, but that gives that makes it seem like there is no confusion in it, which there is. There can be. And then Islam forms separately, so then you get this other thing that's almost exactly the same. And then anything that sounds like Islam is like, oh no, that's Islam, that's a different thing. But it's basically the same thing. What I believe happened is, you have to go back to the origin of these tribes, these Hebrew people, when they left Egypt. The main group of people that were the tellers of the stories that got written down in the Torah, they were in tribes, and they settled, and different tribes got control of this major temple city that was important back before them, because of its geography, because it's situated next to a tectonic fault. And it's one of the first hills in the hilly country that overlooks the sea. It's a really strategic area. So it became the central temple, and at first was the tribe of Benjamin, and then the tribe of Judah, and then they got invaded all this time, by all these different people, and eventually the people from Judah went back to Babylon, were under a king, and they wrote all these stories that they'd been telling. And that became the Torah, which the Torah means the teaching. It's the thing that sort of instructs the society on all the things that they need to know, the awareness of God and the awareness of Allah, and more importantly, Yahuwah, or however you want to say it. Adonai is what a lot of Jewish people want other people to say, because they think it's so special. And I think one of the reasons why it's so special is because the word Allah, or the word Elohim, or this was a concept of just like the force of something. But there also was the notion that there was oppositional forces. and they took the word, I believe, but they just used the word Set, Setan, from the Egyptian world that was part of this story of the ancestral father and the ancestral mother, and there was the brother of the ancestral father, fought and killed the ancestral father, and then the ancestral mother and her sister, put him back together and resurrected him. And that was just a story that, and then we're the observer, the person who's hearing the story. It gets revealed that they are Horus. They are the person who the descendant of these people, and who will, with these, with this awareness, be able to avenge their ancestor who did this bad thing, which is the environment. So it's the desert, it's conflict, it's aggression, it's war, and people, they took it the wrong way, so they created a temple for Set, and Set became a big thing in this society, even though it was not supposed to be this central figure. It did, and especially with the Hyksos, and they got the other Hebrew people to mine and do help their war machine. And so this was all part of Allah. This is all part of Elohim. The Hebrew people, they knew, and they always tried to, and the Torah preserved this concept, is that there is no division between a good God and a bad God. There's just one God, and its nature is good, even though bad things happen. And that, that's sort of the book of Job, is sort of the philosophy of trying to figure out, how do we deal with the bad things that happen? And that's also another book that does make it seem like the bad is personified. And so that points to the religious culture that grew out of Jerusalem. And those are the sort of things that not everyone in the Hebrew world believed the same things. The messages were being laid down by the priests and put into word. And but there was all this empty talk about all these ideas, and the point is, there's like a chain of ideas that have to be fulfilled in order to make sense of it. And the most important part is the oneness of God. And so that is the wisdom of it. It's not then that's the problem, is all these religions that wrote these books, they depended on violence to create a world power, to preserve and to force people to believe what's in these books. And so in order to do that, or in the process of doing that, they created a second deity that everyone had to fear. And it came out of just the way that people talked about it. And that's also just common sense, because we don't want that bad stuff. We don't want to be opposed. We don't want all that stuff to happen. So, but the original wisdom is that it's all one. And so that's why it's important to talk about its nature. Is what is its nature? If all these bad things are happening, how do we understand that? How can we understand what force is really good, and how can we understand the wholeness of it in its most proper way, in its most truthful way? And so that was this name, and I believe that it's written without vowels, because it plays further into the idea surrounding the name, which a Torah.com article talks about, that says that the name is passion or compassion. I like the word compassion because passion and love in our society have been corrupted. to mean other things, and it's very easy to think about things that are much more just like, sex and things that, can be part of that, but they also can just be, like a quick feeling that people can use. And you think of like creepy guys who like lure, people into this with their talk and whatever, and do bad things to other people. So that's why I like the word compassion. And because that explains sort of the treatment that Jesus gave to other people, that explains all the stories in the Bible of people being compassionate towards each other, and in many other cases where they're not compassionate, there's context, there's something that there's like a history they're trying to explain, and these books are really long, and they understood them really long, and so, for example, in the book of Samuel, you have the prayer of Hannah's prayer, and that sort of creates the context for the rest of the story, and the scribes would be writing that, and and it's sort of like the same idea that Jesus was teaching about, that everything is changing, everything is transforming, and so they'd be writing, that this way, that everything's changing, and they'd be reading this way, that everything's changing. And so their society was once a warrior society. It was once working for the Hyksos. It came out, fighting. It was doing some, terrifying things. And from their perspective, it was for God. And that was sort of the legacy that they left behind. But, subtly they wanted to show that the things change. And that's why we're now reading about it and writing about it and living that sort of lifestyle instead of the lifestyle our ancestors lived. And so compassion is the nature of it. It's the reason why things exist. If everything was opposed, nothing would exist, because it just would not, things would just, die, and nothing would live. And so life is an existence. That's, the way they viewed it. And that's what, all of these things are what Jesus preached. And I believe that a significant group of the Jewish people, believed that, even though some people did not, and then they got divided. And the Islamic people believe that too. And that when they talk about, Jewish people in the Bible, all of Jesus and all his followers were Jewish. In the Quran, they talk, some things are positive about Jewish people, some things are negative. I think when we look at the negative things about Jewish people, we have to put it into context. We think of Jewish people as like a separate religion, a separate group, or like a race or something like that. But back then, they were all the same people. It just happened that one group descended from a tribe that took over a city, and so they associated that group, that tribe, with that city, with the sort of lifestyle that they were living, with the sort of way that they were interpreting the religion, the same way the Protestants, looked at the Catholics, or, sectarianism almost. And so I think that's the proper way to interpret that. It's not, it's not Nazi. That's a completely different perspective. And yet, that's how people view it nowadays, because of all the terrible things that are happening between these groups. But I believe that they're all one, and that Islam carried a lot of this messages from the gospel. The common idea and their belief is that the gospel that we have now is not the gospel. I believe that it is. It's just that the nature of the scriptures are that things get corrupted over time in a way. But that doesn't mean, the word corrupted is probably not the best word to use. I think it's better to use the word changed. And so it gets changed. And but those changes are important because they show us things about the society. If anyone's interested in learning about these this, Set cult in Egypt, they have plenty of changes in the Bible to draw them into this whole world, because those were the people that really influenced the development of these books. And that is sort of an interesting loophole, that is part of this, and I think that got played out in Europe too, because Jesus was portrayed as a sacrifice, as the last sacrifice, as an unwanted sacrifice, because Abraham should have been the person who ended sacrifices, and yet Jesus sort of became a shame to religious authorities because these people didn't want to kill him, maybe, and they didn't kill him. The Romans did, but their conflict between the words created the situation where, they put him in the place, and they commanded them, and they said, he's guilty, kill him. And so, and that plays into sort of this rift between the religious authorities, who were trying to say one thing but doing another, and then that ended up in Europe, through conflicts and war and stuff like that, ended the use of sacrifices. And that's an important part of European history, and an important part of the U.S. history too, is that this knowledge of this story became an end to that. And so it should be about preserving life. It should be about acknowledging that human life is holy and that it is a reflection of God. It should be a message of peace. It should be a message of forgiveness. Yet again, the people that spread it, the people that wrote it down, the people that established it, they may have deviated unconsciously or on purpose, most likely on purpose, from the original wisdom, and created a division in the unity of God, which created an evil that is apparently evil and bad, and everyone's scared of it. And anything smart, anything, pentagram, anything geometry is bad, and it's tied to everything that we want to. So it like messes you up, because it's like, whoa, that seems better. And then this good thing where it's control, it's society, it's and that really messes up the wisdom of the original society that they lived in. And it plays into this idea of that you can kill, you can break the Mosaic law, you can do all these things in order to get rid of the bad guys, in order to get rid of the sin and the evil. And so it creates a legitimate evil and a bad evil. When it's all one, you understand it by its fruits, because you understand that it's spiritual, it's behavior, and so just, you can look at the story of Jesus. His spirit lives on because his behaviors live on. The people who act like him, the people who do things like him, they may not look like him, but that's the spirit that lives on, and that's what is taught in that story. It's a very interesting story, and I believe that he did exist, and I think the word Mary probably comes from Murray, from ISIS, or from just in Egypt. That was the word that was very popular there. It was a good name, rather than the explanation that they have in Hebrew that's sort of negative. But I do believe that he exists. But I don't think that the stories we have are they're a religion, and but they're important. They're the reason why I've done what I've done, and it's thanks to the good people through the Catholic Church who created an ambiance and created a story that was really appealing, and and I've experienced some supernatural things that really do make me think that there's something more, such as synchronization and different feelings that there's something more that we can't explain. But lately, I've been feeling kind of not connected to that, and feeling a lot more of the pain and the negative feelings of negative reflection on life. Religious people, they want to say, no, you have to be thankful. No, you have to be happy. And I think that's a very negative thought. I don't think the people who were talking about that stuff wanted it to be turned into that. Sometimes bad things are bad and there's just no way around it. These messages are often just of like Buddhism. They're just, you're transcending the bad. And that salam and shalom are sort of like yin and yang. There's the fire and the water, and then they're just together, and it's just the way that you operate and in connection to things, not in opposition, but in connection and in whole, and that it's and that into God too, and compassion, because that is the nature of God. So becoming one with that, that's the whole code, that's the law. And the law, Jesus didn't want to get rid of the law. Problem with the law is it goes on and on and on and on, and people just misuse it. And all the time, someone's picking a little thing off of a, wheat corn, and they're getting treated like they're harvesting a forest or something like that, or, something that could upset society when everyone's taking a break. And I don't think that person should have been killed. I think that was wrong. But I that's just an example. But he laid down the groundwork for what Islam became, and what Christianity has tried to also say is that, there's these fundamental rules, and the two laws were love God and something like love your neighbor. And in Islam and Surah Al-Bayyinah, which is really like the key, it's like the clear proof that they keep talking about. It's not the key. The key is Al-Fatiha, which teaches you the Arabic language and just these concepts I keep repeating. And there's also a clue, maybe scribal clue, to show like where things change and things like that. That's another theory I have. But the Surah Al-Bayyinah is the proof, the simple proof that they repeat. And it's basically the acknowledgement of what Jesus preached, except they view love your God as to pray. That's the way that it changed through the oral transmission, which convinces me that it's true. And zakat. And zakat is like to give and to purify yourself with giving. And there's all these stories of like the Blackfoot Indians or something like that. They also had a society like that would give, and everyone would give, and that's your way of, that's your meritocracy, is who gives the most. And in this way, it's sort of similar, and it's much more specific than love, because you can be nice to someone and you can say all these nice things, but people need things. And so it's almost like socialism, and actually the first socialists were Christians. But because of the dogma and because of the hierarchy of religion, a lot of socialists left religion, and they said, no, religion's bad. And by leaving religion, by seeing the bad things in religion, they left the good things, and they became bad themselves. And we had, communists killing people, and not realizing the damage that they were doing, because these people are reflections of the universe. So that, this is bad karma, bad things are going to happen. Same thing with Germany, terrible things, happened. And these were people, that had a lot to contribute to the world, and they're gone. And so now we're in a very difficult position because, people all over this part of the world, and here too, and here, and, people that got sent over here, they're gone. And, we didn't have their minds. We didn't have their perspectives when we were figuring this all out. And so we're all messed up now. And so, but, living now in the moment is part of the message, I think. And that's how we can reach forgiveness, is to live now and think about now. And now I gotta go have dinner. So bless you guys, and I hope this is interesting. Peace.